Hi, and welcome to our next broadcast of Buddhist Times.
Hello and welcome, and thank you for all your comments and thumbs up, Mum.
And as we said last week, we are both lifelong Buddhists and we're members of Soka Gakkai International, but this is not an official Soka Gakkai podcast.
Yes, this is essentially our personal opinion, which is why we would like to hear your personal opinion afterwards. And of course, what we'll also be doing at some point in the future is asking other people to come in with us to give their personal opinion.
Thanks, Mark.
Laurence.
And we're going to talk openly and frankly about the human condition, the kind of problems that we found ourselves in this world today, and how a Buddhist outlook might be able to help people to see a better way forward.
Yes, and we agreed that probably the thing that is going to concern most people is happiness, the pursuit of happiness. And so we thought we'd talk about that today. It's a powerful subject, and I think that dictates most of our lives.
Yes, as we were saying last week, every human being has I believe, I'm sure Mark does, to a fundamental right to happiness. We've got fundamental rights to education, to having a roof over our heads, to having enough food and water, to be protected in the societies that we live in. But we also have a right to happiness, but it's harder to define than putting some food on the table or listening to a nice piece of music. I was just going to mention the founder of our lay organisation, Soka Gakkai, who was a primary school teacher in Japan just before the Second World War, and his name was Sinesaburo Makaguchi. And Mr. Makaguchi, he came up with a definition of happiness, and it's quite an interesting one. His definition of happiness is when the heart, the mind and the hands are all gainfully occupied. So that could mean, for example, if you are playing a musical instrument, so your hands are busy, your eyes and your heart and your enthusiasm are concentrating on what you're doing. Perhaps you're making something, you could be painting a picture, you could be constructing something at work. But when the human mind is fully concentrating on a task that the human being is enjoying, that's what Mr. Makaguchi thought was happiness.
Well, I have to say that I fully agree with Mr. Makaguchi. It's a way of, when you escape your own mind, you are escaping, among other things, your own demons. And when you are fully concentrating on the exterior world rather than the interior world, where your imagination can run absolutely riot, some people will allow themselves to do this. Whereas when you are fully occupied with exterior issues, particularly complex ones like wood carving or sport, this is when we are not only realizing our full potential, or at least moving towards it, but also are fully concentrating on something that is outside ourselves. So it seems, I would say that seems very, very wise on the part of Mr. Makaguchi.
There's also a very powerful concept in Buddhism known as the 10 worlds, and one of the worlds it's got various names. So one of them is essentially rapture, and everybody understands that feeling. You're down in your luck, down in the dumps, everything seems to be going wrong, and you suddenly get that phone call, that email that says you've got that new job. The partner you've been attracted to is suddenly returning your phone calls, or you win that lottery, you win that 10,000, you clear your debts, and there's that sense of bliss, rapture, which is a form of happiness, although of course pretty short-lived.
Yeah, it's short-lived happiness, and so I think that what Laurence has been describing is exterior sources of happiness, and over which, of course, we don't have so much control. That phone call that we so ardently desire from the loved one, especially when we're not sure if they actually are returning our love, is something that essentially undermines us because we're not in control at all of our own happiness. And when you are undermined in that way, what you're doing is you're giving control of your life to other people and other institutions and organisations. So
why can't we be more? Why can't we attract these things in a more frequent basis? I mean, surely that would be a wonderful thing if human beings could have a steady flow of really good luck, good benefit. Is that something to do with what we call karma?
Yeah, we mentioned this last week. It most likely is. So alleviating your karma will, to a certain extent, make your own luck. There are many phrases and sayings associated with this. God loves a trier, for example. Laurence.
Well, we looked at the idea of what we would call temporary happiness, and that seems to be very much based on external factors, things going well for us. I was just wondering, Mark, do you think that people's happiness can be affected by the world around them, the society that they live in? Is that possible?
I think it's certain. The society that we live in, to a large extent, will be influencing people's inner states, mainly through consumption and so on. I think that it's a constant pressure that we all find ourselves under is to attain happiness through the consuming of various goods. This leads to all sorts of problems in society. For example, with people eating to be happy,
or drinking
to be happy,
smoking,
and smoking
drugs
to be happy, drugs, but also cars,
sex,
and sex, but also I was watching a very interesting show last night about fashion and the way that the fashion industry is effectively the second biggest polluter on the planet, which would, and this is not something that occurs to us, and yet there it is, and the amount of clothes that people buy in this country, the UK, is absolutely phenomenal. And why do they do it? Well, they're not quite sure why they do it, but it's probably a lot to do with chasing that chimeric happiness.
Well, clothes are ridiculously cheap, really,
yeah.
Certainly on the UK high street, and I don't personally do it, but I have heard about people who will buy an outfit for the weekend and then just throw it away on Monday morning, not even taking it down to the local charity shop. And as you say, the amount of energy that's gone into making the materials, and also the exploitation of people who live in very poor countries, some parts of China, Africa, who are working effectively as slaves to provide these cheap clothes for that UK high street.
Well, what's called an externalisation of our consumption is, in effect, this poverty. The Aral Sea is one fine example of this, where the river feeding it was blocked off in order to irrigate the cotton industry in now was it Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan? I don't know, they're next to each other. And because it takes something like, I don't know how many thousands of litres of water to make one t-shirt. So this is something that is clearly not only unsustainable but also is deeply political, where the pursuit of people's happiness results in the destruction of other people's livelihoods and environments.
But is this being fed by my own desire to look good in a new set of clothes? So I will really join in that exploitation of the poor people who have to make my clothes, and also am I joining in the destruction of the planet that we live on, just for the sake of my own happiness? Or am I just a victim of the advertising industry who hypnotise me into making myself feel happy or unhappy?
I'd say the second one. Mostly, I think what the clothing industry and the advertising industry do is they work hand in hand in order to persuade us that we'll be happy if only we buy, this new T-shirt. And I think it's sort of a very short-term rush, and then after that we need another one.
That's almost like an addiction, like a drug, perhaps like cocaine or.
Yes, maybe not quite as extreme as cocaine, but yes, absolutely, I'd say that's the case. And of course, this brings us straight to the next question, which is, how do we get out of that vicious circle and into something much more long-term as an individual? How do we become happier without all that external trappings? How do we do that?
I think this is where most people would say some kind of spiritual practice comes in, and it's often the reason for a spiritual practice is to take our minds off the purely materialistic and to look for reasons for existence beyond just these endless cravings and desires that we have. It's interesting that in our Buddhism, in Nichiren Buddhism, desires aren't actually considered to be bad things.
Desire leads to illumination. How does that work?
Illumination.
Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work? Well, I remember in my own case, I was given a rather nice white Mercedes, and which I didn't know quite what to do with except drive it around. So I did. In fact, I found that my Mercedes was more comfortable to sit on than my sofa of that time, and the sound system was better too. So I've been driving that around, but in the end, it cost too much money because at the time it was a fiver just to get out of the garage. So I had to end up by giving it back to the person who had initially given it to me. They were slightly surprised, when I realised that in fact it wasn't making me any happier because of the cost. I'd also just bought a new sofa, which meant that I didn't have to rely on the Mercedes to find a comfortable place to sit.
But would you agree with me, Mark, that that some form of spiritual practice is a way of taming those seemingly that bottomless pit of desires that can only be satisfied through spending money or exploiting other people?
Yes, and it was through meditation that I realised that this car was quite simply not bringing me what I wanted. Oddly enough, the entire National Health Service agrees with you, because they are now putting out very official leaflets about the benefits of meditation.
Do we meditate in Nichiren Buddhism?
Well, I think you know the answer to that one, Lawrence. Yes, we do. So we were talking about meditation and happiness. What would you say is one of the links between meditation and happiness, Laurence?
Well, I personally don't do kind of what we might look on as classical or standard or normal meditation, which I think you were referring to a minute ago. But as Nichiren Buddhists, I would say we do a kind of noisy meditation, which is chanting.
Yes.
And which we'll look into that in another episode. And yes, it doesn't really matter whether you're chanting, meditating, or silently meditation. The fact is that you are allowing yourself to be centered, to be focused on your inner self and your spiritual self, your what some people call your true self, because if the kind of person that we become when we are exploiting other people, when we are endlessly searching to buy and to consume, I think you would agree, Mark, that's not really our true selves.
It's not the best part of ourselves, is it?
Yeah, it's just an aspect of itself, that's true, but it's not something that I certainly am not particularly proud of when I become that kind of person. Just a rampant consumer. If I've suddenly got too much money in my pocket and I want to spend that money, it's a nice feeling for a while, sure, but I don't really feel that I'm doing much to contribute to other people's happiness. Let's talk about that, by the way. How important is it to help other people to be happy? And can we do it? Or is somebody's happiness just pertinent and relevant to themselves?
No, of course we can do it. Simply by talking about it as we are. I think that, just to come back to your remark very quickly, if you're buying stuff that will bring about other people's happiness, or will help them anyway, then that's a sustainable investment, I would say, and one worth doing. If you're doing something that is just for yourself, like buying, for example, a motorbike with no passenger seat, then that will probably not be a contributing factor to world peace and human happiness. However, if you were to buy a people carrier and ferry them around because they need it, then that most certainly would be a contributing factor to bringing other people happiness. I'd just like to mention this meditation and happiness. We mentioned before about Mr. Makiguchi's definition of happiness, where he encourages people to concentrate on something exterior, such as woodworking, sport, music, etc. And then what you said about when we meditate, we concentrate on the best part of ourselves in order to encourage that to grow, to explore it, to identify it, and to become better acquainted with it, which will of course mean that it will take a bigger and bigger part of our lives. It's exactly the same mechanism as Makiguchi was talking about, escaping and going towards something.
Yes, taking your mind off things.
It's gaining control over your mind. Instead of allowing it to go flapping around like a half-dead bird, all of a sudden, what are you doing? You're focusing on what you desire to focus on. You set yourself a goal of happiness, for example, and then when you know how to do it, you plan to put the work in, you do it, and then when you've done it, you say, I've done it, that was good, I'll do it again tomorrow.
Okay. I think just to finish this episode, something I'd like to think about just for a couple of minutes is it possible to always be happy, or is it part of the human condition that we're just going to sink into despair now and again? For example, if you're really ill, as we all will be at one time or another in our lives, or you're watching someone in your family who's ill and suffering, can you still be happy?
Yes.